The desert wind across the Syrian plain doesn't smell of sand. It smells of dust and blood and fear. It is 11:13, and the world is breaking. From the west, a tide of iron and faith has crashed upon these shores. They call themselves Franj, Crusaders. They have taken Jerusalem, carving a brittle, bloody kingdom from the heart of Islam. And here, in Aleppo, the great northern citadel trembles. Its rulers are weak, divided by venomous court intrigues, while Frankish armies cast long shadows from Antioch. But in the royal palace, a boy of 10 sees none of this grandeur of collapse. He sees only the polished marble floor, cold against his knees. He hears the muffled sobs of the women behind silk screens. And he stares at the still form on the divan, draped in rich brocade, his father, Sanquara al-Hajib, the governor of Aleppo. Dead. Not in battle, not with a sword in hand, but murdered. Beheaded by the order of the Sultan in Baghdad, a victim of politics he could not navigate. This is Imad ad-Din Zengi. An orphan. A prince with no throne, a name now a liability. The memory is not of a face, but of an axe. A soldier, his father's own, stepping forward in the courtyard weeks before. The man's eyes were empty as stone. The axe rose, a flash of sun on steel, and fell on the neck of a bound prisoner. The thunk was wet, final. The head rolled. The heat of the day did nothing to stop the chill that seized Imad's heart. That sound, that is the sound of power. Not the speeches in the Diwan, not the flattery of poets. It is the sound that ends arguments. His father forgot that. And now he is gone. The boy is shipped away, a political pawn in a dangerous game. He is sent to the court of Mosul, to the care of its governor, a man of grim reputation. The journey is a haze of burning sky and grit-strung eyes. The caravan moves through a land scarred by war, blackened fields, deserted villages where only the crows remain. He hears the distant clang of a smithy hammering a sword, a sound like a heartbeat of violence. He smells the sour tang of unwashed soldiers, the oil on their chainmail. In Mosul, he is not a prince. He is a ward. A hostage, though they do not use the word. The court is a cage of cold eyes and whispered calculations. He learns to read the silence between words, to see the threat in a too polite smile. He spends his days in the dusty training yard, his small hands blistering on the hilt of a practice sword. The older boys, sons of emirs, knock him down, their laughter sharp as daggers. Orphan of Aleppo, they sneer. The humiliation is a fire in his gut, hotter than the desert sun. But at night, in the solitude of his bare chamber, the fire cools into a hard, sharp resolve. He remembers the axe. He remembers his father's stillness. He will not be still. He will not be a piece moved by other men's hands. The chaos of the age is not his curse, it is his forge. While the Seljuk princes bicker over baubles and titles, and the Franj solidify their castles along the coast, he watches. He listens. He stores every slight, every lesson in weakness, every map of alliance and betrayal. The man who will become the scourge of the Crusaders is not born in a moment of glory, but in the long, quiet nights of a forgotten boy. He is forged in the heat of shame and the cold marble of loss. The orphan prince begins to build his foundation not from stone, but from will. A will as hard and unyielding as the steps that birthed his ancestors. The world is breaking. Good. He will learn to break it first and remake it in his own image. The first chapter closes not with a battle, but with a boy standing at a narrow window, looking south towards the lands he lost. The wind carries the call to prayer, a mournful, beautiful sound over a wounded land. He does not pray. He promises. To the ghost of his father. To himself. The axe will rise again. But next time, it will be in his hand. The dust settled on the plain of Imad, a shroud over the fresh grave, and over the shattered fragments of a boy's world. The cries had faded, replaced by a hollow silence that pressed down on young Imad ad-Din Zengi. He was barely 10 years old, a child suddenly stripped of his father, Aksunqura al-Hajib, the trusted emir of Aleppo. Aksunqura, whose strength had been a shield, whose laughter had filled the family tent, was gone, betrayed, assassinated, left to the mercies of a cruel desert sun. Zengi remembered the frantic whispers, the hurried packing, the cold hand of a servant pulling him away from the gruesome scene, the last glimpse of his father's lifeless form. The world, once a place of order and protection, had dissolved into a terrifying, unpredictable chaos. He was an orphan, a son of a fallen leader, a pawn in a game far too vast and deadly for his young mind to grasp. Fear, cold and sharp, was his constant companion. He clung to what little remained, a few loyal retainers, the echoing memory of his father's voice. But loyalty in the Seljuk Sultanate was a fickle thing, often shifting with the winds of power. A child with no protector was a target, or worse, forgotten. He felt the eyes on him, assessing, calculating. He heard the hushed conversations, the names of powerful emirs, the machinations of a court fractured by ambition and treachery. He was adrift, a solitary vessel in a storm-tossed sea. His only inheritance seemed to be a profound sense of vulnerability and a burning, unarticulated question. What now? Then a new shadow fell, one both menacing and protective. It belonged to Kerbogha, the formidable Atabeg of Mosul, a Turkmen warlord of immense power and an unflinching reputation. Kerbogha had been a comrade in arms to Aksunqura, a fellow emir who had navigated the treacherous currents of Sultan Malik Shah's court. He arrived not with comfort, but with a stark declaration. The boy, Zengi, would be taken under his wing, raised in his household, forged in the crucible of Mosul. It was not an offer, but a command, a pragmatic act of a man who understood the brutal necessities of their world. Zengi, small and bewildered, was bundled onto a horse, his few belongings following. The journey to Mosul was long, arduous, a blur of dusty plains and distant mountains, each mile separating him further from the ghost of his past. Mosul. It was a city carved from stone and ambition, a fortress on the Tigris, a strategic linchpin in the sprawling, fragmented Seljuk domain. Here, in Kerbogha's imposing citadel, Zengi's childhood ended. There was no gentle hand, no soft bed for the boy whose father had fallen. Instead, there was discipline, relentless and unyielding. He was not a son, but a ward, an apprentice to the harsh realities of power. Kerbogha, a man of iron will and strategic brilliance, was a tutor by example. He taught not through words of affection, but through the stark, unforgiving lessons of command, of war, of survival. Zengi's days became a relentless rhythm of training. The clang of steel on steel echoed in the courtyards as he learned the weight of a sword, the precise angle of a parry, the swift thrust of a kill stroke. His small hands, once used to toys, now gripped the hilt of a training blade, calluses forming, muscles aching. He spent countless hours in the saddle, learning to become one with the horse, to ride through the scorching desert sun and the biting winter winds, to wield a bow with deadly accuracy at a gallop. He learned to endure thirst, hunger, exhaustion, to push past the limits of his young body. Kerbogha's men, hardened warriors, became his reluctant instructors, their gruff commands punctuated by sharp corrections and the occasional, grudging nod of approval. But the forging was not merely physical. Zengi, always observant, watched Kerbogha like a hawk. He saw the Atebeg's ruthless efficiency, his strategic mind dissecting maps, his unwavering gaze during councils of war. He witnessed the brutal swiftness with which Kerbogha dealt with dissent, the cold calculation in his political maneuvers. He learned that power was not given but seized, that loyalty was earned through strength, not sentiment, that mercy was a luxury rarely afforded. He heard the whispers of the Atebeg's campaigns against rebellious emirs, against the encroaching Frankish crusaders from the west. He understood that this was a world of constant conflict, where the sword was the final arbiter. In the quiet hours, when the campfires flickered and the city settled into a restless sleep, Zengi would lie awake, the sounds of Mosul a symphony of his new life, the distant call of a sentry, the clatter of a guard's armor, the murmuring of the Tigris. He would replay the day's lessons, the sting of a missed blow, the frustration of a failed maneuver. His grief for his father, once a raw wound, began to transmute into a steely resolve. He would not be weak. He would not be a victim. He would learn. He would survive. He would become a man worthy of his father's legacy, a man capable of navigating this treacherous world. Months turned into years. The boy who arrived in Mosul, frightened and lost, slowly gave way to a youth of lean muscle and sharp intellect. The fear never entirely vanished, but it was now tempered by a quiet determination, a deep-seated understanding of the forces that shaped their world. He had seen the ambition that drove men, the treachery that undid them, the courage that sometimes saved them. He had felt the desert wind whip across his face, the sun burn his skin, the ground tremble beneath charging hooves. He had tasted the salt of his own sweat and the bitter tang of defeat in training. He had been forged in Kerbogger's fire, tempered by the harsh realities of a warlord's court, sharpened by the constant threat of war. He was no longer just Imad ad-Din Zengi, the son of the fallen Aksunquara. He was a survivor, an observer, a student of power, ready to step onto the stage of a world desperate for strong leadership. The stage was set, and the young falcon was ready to spread his wings. The sun over Isfahan does not merely shine, it judges. It beats down upon the turquoise domes and the dust-choked corridors of power with a relentless, blinding heat that strips a man of his pretenses. For young Imad ad-Din Zengi, the heat is a familiar weight, much like the shadow of his father's ghost. He stands in the courtyard of the great Seljuk Sultan, a man surrounded by the opulence of an empire that is silently, violently, beginning to fray at the edges. Can you hear it? Underneath the rhythmic chanting of the call to prayer and the melodic haggling of the silk merchants, there is the sound of sharpening steel. It is the sound of 1,000 minor lords, each dreaming of a crown, each waiting for the Sultan's foot to slip. Zengi hears it more clearly than most. To others, he is merely the son of a fallen hero, a ward of the state to be watched and perhaps used. But to Zengi, this court is a school of survival, and the shifting sands of the desert are more stable than the loyalties of the men who call him friend. He remembers the smell of his father's blood, iron sharp and hot, mingling with the dust of the executioner's square. That scent never truly leaves a man. It lingers in the back of his throat whenever he bows to a new master. Every step Zengi takes through the Sultan's palace is a calculated move on a chessboard he did not choose, but one he intends to master. He watches the way Sultan Mahmud moves, the subtle tremor in the hand that holds the wine goblet, the way his eyes dart toward the door whenever a messenger arrives in haste. The great Seljuk Empire, once a monolith that stretched from the borders of China to the shores of the Mediterranean, is now a house of cards held together by the memory of strength rather than strength itself. The air in the war room is thick with the scent of tallow candles and old parchment. Maps are sprawled across cedar tables, their edges curled by the humidity. Zengi leans over them, his fingers tracing the routes through the Zagros mountains, down into the fertile plains of Iraq. He feels the thrum of the earth beneath his boots, a low, constant vibration of impending war. The borders are bleeding. To the west, the men from beyond the sea, the Franks, have carved out kingdoms of stone and iron, fortifying Jerusalem and Antioch. To the east, the nomadic tribes are restless. And here, in the heart of the Sultanate, the Atabegs are carving out their own small heavens, indifferent to the crumbling of the whole. Zengi's internal monologue is a silent roar. They fight for the scraps of a feast that ended decades ago, he thinks. He sees the arrogance of the generals, men who believe that a title given by a weak sultan is the same as power earned in the saddle. He knows better. Power is not a gift, it is a seizure. It is the moment when the sword clears the scabbard, and the world holds its breath. He moves to the window, looking out over the encampment. Thousands of horses stir in the twilight, their breath blooming like ghosts in the cooling air. The sound of their hooves against the dry earth is a percussive promise. Zengi feels the weight of his father's sword at his hip, not the physical blade, which was lost long ago, but the weight of the name Ak-Sunquera. It is a name that commands respect in the barracks and fear in the council chambers. He knows that as long as he is a soldier of the Sultan, he is a servant. But the desert is wide, and the wind is changing. There is a specific kind of silence that precedes a storm, a heavy, suffocating stillness where even the insects stop their chirping. Zengi lives in that silence. He has learned to speak with his eyes and listen with his skin. He watches the rivalries between the viziers, the whispered conspiracies in the hammams, the way gold changes hands in the dark. He realizes that the Sultan's authority is a mirage, a shimmering image of water that vanishes the moment you reach for it. The real power lies in the iron will of the men who can hold the gates of a city when the world is burning. He thinks of Mosul. The name tastes like copper and cold water. Mosul is the key, the gateway between the highlands and the desert, the pivot point upon which the fate of the East will turn. It is currently a nest of vipers, governed by men who seek only to enrich themselves, while the Frankish threat grows like a cancer to the west. Zengi knows he must get there. He must transform himself from a loyal commander into an indispensable force. The night air finally breaks, and a cool breeze sweeps through the palace, carrying the scent of rain from the distant mountains. Zengi closes his eyes and breathes it in. He can feel the shift in the political atmosphere, a crack in the foundation of the Seljuk house. A rebellion is brewing in the south, a challenge to the Sultan's legitimacy that will require a man of iron to suppress. This is his moment. Not to save the Sultan, but to make himself the only man the Sultan can rely on. In the darkness of his quarters, Zengi does not pray for peace. He prays for the clarity to see the path through the chaos. He understands that he is a child of the sword, born into a world that is being dismantled piece by piece. To survive, he must be more than a warrior. He must be the architect of a new order. The shifting sands of the Sultanate may swallow the weak, but for a man who knows how to ride the dunes, they are a path to a throne. As the first light of dawn touches the minarets of Isfahan, Zengi dons his mail. The links click together with a metallic finality. He tightens his cinch, feels the familiar tension of the leather, and steps out into the light. The time for observation is ending. The time for the hunt is beginning. The son of the executed Hajib is no longer a ward. He is a predator, and the empire is his hunting ground. The sands are shifting, and Imad ad-Din Zengi is the only one who knows exactly where they will land. The dust of the plains still clung to his cloak, a fine, gritty testament to the long ride from Baghdad. Imad ad-Din Zengi, son of Aksunkura al-Hajib, rode through the gates of Mosul not with the fanfare of a triumphant warlord, but with the quiet, measured gravitas of a man stepping onto a stage he was destined to command. The city, ancient Nineveh reborn, spread before him like a sprawling, sun-baked beast, its mud-brick dwellings huddling beneath walls that had seen empires rise and fall. He was 38. 38 years forged in the crucible of Seljuk politics, a lifetime spent navigating the treacherous currents of ambition and betrayal. He had served the Sultan Mahmud II, earning respect and fear in equal measure. But Mosul was different. The Sultan's decree had elevated him, yes, but it was also a gamble. A broken city, a fractured province, ravaged by infighting and the constant shadow of the Frankish crusaders to the west. This was no prize. It was a gauntlet thrown. Zengi dismounted in the courtyard of the citadel, the air thick with the murmur of onlookers, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. His eyes, keen and unblinking, swept over the assembled officials, their faces a tableau of nervous deference. He heard the whisper of their hopes for stability and the louder, unspoken anxieties of those who had profited from chaos. The scent of wood smoke and spices mingled with the metallic tang of sweat from his guards. A fly buzzed lazily past his ear, a stark contrast to the buzzing tension that now filled the air. He stepped into the reception hall, the light filtering through arched windows, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the stale air. The previous governor, a man of soft hands and weaker will, had left a legacy of neglect. Zengi saw it in the faded tapestries, the chipped plaster, the subtle disarray that spoke volumes about a leadership lacking an iron grip. He ran a gloved finger over the rough stone of a pillar, feeling the cool, ancient weight of the city. The treasury is empty, the chief financial officer, a portly man named Yusuf, stammered, his eyes darting from Zengi's face to the floor. The revenue from the lands, it has been scarce, my lord. The Bedouin tribes, they raid with impunity. Zengi listened, his expression unreadable. He heard the excuses, the veiled accusations, the carefully constructed narratives of incompetence. He saw the city's decay, not just in its physical state, but in the spirit of its people. They were weary, these citizens of Mosul, tired of endless skirmishes, of rulers who promised much and delivered little. They yearned for order, for a strong hand to guide them through the deepening twilight of the Seljuk Sultanate. He remembered his father, Aksunkura, the first Atabeg of Aleppo, a man of unwavering loyalty and fierce resolve, betrayed and executed. Zengi carried that memory like a brand, a constant reminder of the fragility of power and the necessity of absolute control. He would not repeat his father's fate. He would forge an empire from this fractured land. Assemble the commanders, Zengi's voice cut through the silence, deep and resonant. All of them. And the tribal sheikhs. By dawn, his words were not a request, they were an unyielding command. I want a full accounting of every soldier, every horse, every measure of grain. And let it be known, any who seek to profit from the city's weakness will find their own weakness exposed, swiftly and decisively. The words hung in the air, a chill wind sweeping through the complacent halls. Yusuf paled, his jowls trembling. The other officials exchanged nervous glances. This was no mere administrator. This was a force of nature. That night, Zengi stood on the battlements, the cool night ere a welcome balm on his face. Below him, the Tigris wound its way through the darkness, a silver ribbon under the crescent moon. Across the river, the ancient mounds of Nineveh whispered tales of empires long gone. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, all had held sway here. Now it was his turn. He could hear the distant bray of a donkey, the faint cries of street vendors, the occasional challenging bark of a dog. But louder in his mind was the constant drumbeat of his ambition. The Frankish lords in Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, Jerusalem, they were a festering wound on the body of Islam. And the Muslim emirs, squabbling like jackals over scraps, were doing little to stem the tide. Mosul was more than just a city, it was a strategic linchpin. From here, he could rebuild, rearm, and unite. From here, he could launch the counter-jihad. He closed his eyes, picturing the map of the fractured lands, the myriad of petty kingdoms, the vulnerability. He felt the weight of his sword at his hip, a familiar comfort. He heard the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of the Nineveh throne, not a plea, but a challenge, daring him to claim its ancient power. He would answer. With blood and iron, he would answer. The chaos would end. The weakness would be purged. And from the ashes of division, a new, formidable power would rise. Imad ad-Din Zengi had arrived. And Mosul, and indeed the world, would soon know his name. The vipers coil in the city of wolves. The dust never settles in Mosul. It hangs in the air like a living thing, coating the limestone walls, filling the lungs of merchants and soldiers alike. Zengi tastes it now, standing in the courtyard of the citadel as the midday sun turns everything the color of old bronze. He's 28 years old, and the governor's seal burns heavy in his palm. The appointment came 3 days ago. Mosul, the great northern fortress that guards the approaches to Syria and the gateway to the east. A city of wolves, his father would have called it. A place where loyalty is bought with silver and sold for gold, where every smile conceals a blade. He watches the garrison assemble before him. 200 men, maybe less. Their armor is dented, their faces hard with suspicion. These are not the disciplined troops of Baghdad. These are survivors. Men who have outlasted 3 governors in as many years, each one carried out of this citadel in pieces or in chains. The commander steps forward. His name is Rashid, and his beard is streaked with grey. The scars on his forearms tell stories that Zengi already knows how to read. This man has killed. Often. And he's wondering right now if he'll need to kill again. The men await your orders, Governor. Governor. The word sounds strange in this heat, in this place where authority means nothing unless you can defend it with steel. Zengi lets the silence stretch. He learned this from watching his father's enemies. The ones who survived always knew when to speak and when to let fear do the work. How many of you, Zengi's voice cuts through the stillness, were here when Governor Mahmud died? Hands rise. More than half. He expected this. And when Governor Hassan fled to Damascus, fewer hands now, but still too many. Then you know what happens to weak men in Mosul. He steps down from the platform, moving among them. The leather of his boots scrapes against stone. You've learned to wait. To watch. To see which way the wind blows before you commit your swords. He stops in front of Rashid. The old soldier's jaw tightens. I am not a weak man. The words hang there, simple and absolute. Zengi turns his back on the commander, on all of them, and walks to the edge of the courtyard where the city sprawls below. From here, he can see the Tigris cutting through Mosul like a vein of silver, the bridge packed with traders hauling goods from Persia and beyond. The minarets rise above the chaos, calling the faithful to prayer 5 times a day, but between those prayers, this city devours the unprepared. In 3 months, Zengi continues, not turning around, the Seljuk Sultan will send inspectors. They will count our grain stores, assess our defenses, measure our worth. If we are found wanting, another governor will take my place. And you will begin this dance again with someone new. He hears the shuffle of feet, the whisper of doubt. But I did not come here to fail. Now he turns, and his eyes find each man in turn. My father held Aleppo when stronger men said it was impossible. He taught me that a city is not walls and gates. A city is will. The will to endure when the crusaders come. The will to strike when they show weakness. The will to transform rabble into an army. A wind picks up, carrying the smell of the tanneries, the bread ovens, the 1,000 lives pressed together in these ancient streets. I offer you a choice. Zengi's hand moves to his sword, not drawing it, just resting there. Serve me with loyalty, and I will make you rich. Betray me, and I will make you a lesson. Rashid's eyes narrow. For a moment, the courtyard holds its breath. Then the old commander slams his fist against his chest, the salute echoing off stone walls. We serve, Governor. The others follow, a wave of fists striking armor, the sound building like thunder before a storm. Zengi nods, but inside, his heart pounds with a truth he'll never speak aloud. He needs them more than they need him. This city, this impossible, treacherous city, will either forge him into something greater or grind him into the same dust that coats everything. That night, alone in the governor's chambers, he stands by the window. The city spreads below him, torchlit and mysterious. Somewhere out there, enemies are already plotting. The Crusader states to the west, hungry for expansion. The rival governors in Damascus and Aleppo, watching for any sign of weakness. And here, within these very walls, men who smile by day and sharpen knives by night. His hand touches the cold stone of the window frame. The viper has entered the den of wolves. Now comes the part where he teaches them who the true predator is. The dust of his arrival in Mosul had barely settled, yet the weight of his new title, Atabeg, pressed down on Imad ad-Din Zengi like the relentless desert sun. He had found a city riddled with whispers, a court divided, and the surrounding lands a patchwork of ambitious emirs and autonomous towns, each vying for their own sliver of power. To the west lay the Crusader states, an ever-present, festering wound, but Zengi knew a true physician first staunches the internal bleeding before confronting the external plague. His rule in Mosul, while decreed by the distant Sultan, was not yet truly his. He needed to forge it, temper it in the crucible of battle, and make its loyalty unbreakable. He stood often on the ramparts of the citadel, the wind whipping his cloak, his gaze sweeping across the vast, undulating plains that stretched towards the horizon. His father, Aksunquara, a man of legend, had carved out his domain with a sword and an unyielding will. Zengi felt the echoes of that legacy in his own veins, a fierce fire that demanded action. He was no mere administrator. He was a falcon, sharp-eyed and predatory, and Mosul was merely his perch. His eyes narrowed. Loyalty, he understood, was not given, it was seized. And fear, often, was its most potent ally. The town of Aksar, a prosperous hub nestled along the Tigris, had become a thorn in his side. Its governor, an opportunistic minor emir named Jawali, had grown accustomed to a lax hand, diverting taxes, ignoring summons, and openly questioning Zengi's authority. Jawali's defiance was a festering wound that, if left untended, would spread infection throughout Zengi's nascent domain. Aksar was not just a town, it was a test. A test of Zengi's resolve, his strategy, and the mettle of the warriors he now commanded. He would not fail. Orders flew through the sprawling courtyards of the citadel. The clang of steel on steel, the rhythmic thud of smiths hammering armor, filled the air. Horses whinnied in the stables, their hooves impatient. Thousands of men, Turkmen cavalry, Kurdish archers, Arab footmen, gathered under the banners of Mosul. The scent of sweat, leather, and dry earth hung heavy. Zengi moved among them, his presence a palpable force. He spoke little, but his gaze, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. He personally inspected the siege engines, the provisions, the readiness of each squadron. This was not a punitive raid, it was a declaration. At dawn, under a sky streaked with bruised purples and fiery oranges, the army marched. The ground trembled with the thunder of hooves, a vast, living river of men and animals snaking across the sun-baked earth. Dust rose in choking clouds, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer, stinging the eyes. The relentless sun beat down, baking the armor, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Yet Zengi rode at the head, his armor gleaming, his face set. He felt the weight of the moment, the hopes and fears of his men, and the ghost of his father urging him onward. This is how a realm is built, he thought, one determined step at a time, one challenge met with unwavering force. The silence of the desert was broken only by the murmur of commands, the creak of wagons, and the rhythmic beat of drums, a heartbeat of impending conflict. Days later, the army crested a low ridge, and Aksar lay before them. Its mud-brick walls, though modest, seemed formidable under the midday sun. The Tigris, a ribbon of silver, flowed lazily beside it. From within, a defiant silence hung in the air, a challenge thrown back at Zengi. Jawali, it seemed, had chosen to resist. Good. Zengi preferred open confrontation to treacherous whispers. He surveyed the fortifications, his mind already calculating angles, weak points, the strategic deployment of his engines. He saw the fear that flickered in the eyes of his own men, a natural apprehension before the storm. He had to extinguish it, replace it with conviction. The assault began with a terrifying roar. Siege engines hurled massive stones, shattering the air, their impact shaking the very ground. Archers rained down arrows, a deadly, whistling curtain that sought out any exposed flesh on the ramparts. Zengi, dismounted, moved along the front lines. His voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable authority. Close ranks. Push forward. Show them the might of Mosul. His personal guard, hardened veterans, formed a protective ring, but Zengi was no distant commander. He directed the placement of ladders, the movements of his sappers, his eyes everywhere, absorbing the chaos and translating it into precise commands. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and iron. Swords clashed with a sickening clang. The cries of men, both wounded and victorious, echoed off the walls. Zengi watched as his Turkmen horsemen, dismounted, swarmed the ladders, their scimitars flashing. He saw a gap, a momentary hesitation among Jawali's defenders on a weakened section of the wall. Now, he bellowed, pointing with his scabbard. Breach that section. Show no quarter. His men responded with a surge of renewed ferocity. They were not just fighting for Zengi. They were fighting for the very idea of a strong, unified rule, for an end to the petty squabbles that weakened them all against a greater enemy. The gates, battered by a ram, finally splintered, and the first wave of Zengi's elite infantry poured through, a torrent of vengeance. The fight inside was brutal, short, and decisive. Jawali's men, demoralized and outmatched, soon surrendered or fled.